Cyclone!
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. That may be somewhat quiet. We covered most of what we needed to discuss last week. And our intention for this week is just to play some Street Fighter. Keep on the same psychological things as before. So whether or not I have much to say is mostly going to come down to whether or not there's any specific opponent with a specific way of dealing with things. But obviously we're starting off here with a Zangief, who is being quite serious with their pressure. So, not exactly going to have a lot to say there either.
Round 2. Fight! Muscle power volume! You lose. Round 1. Fight! Round 2. Fight! Muscle power volume! You lose. Let's do this. iron round one. Round two. Fight! Muscle power, volume! Zangief wins. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! Zangief wins. Let's do this. Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. Zangief wins. Round one. Fight.
I'm rapidly reminded of why this matchup is so hard for Ibuki in general. In the combination of her relatively terrible backdash and lack of clean ways to hit Zangief in neutral, she ends up playing a very footsie-based game, but not without some definite risks that, you know, one of the characters that is best at keeping her outflexed. And since he has such large hitboxes and the ability to just throw you, as well as lock down in certain situations using his armor, it can actually be too difficult to even use her basically evasive hitboxes and ninjutsu to get out of the way of things he wants to do. However, he does have a lot more trouble chasing her down than most characters, and while she is definitely susceptible to that, much more so than most people because of the way her jump works, there's still ways to get the life lead and keep it long enough that she probably wouldn't have to care if she decided to keep it out altogether. And so, while it's relatively easy for Zangief to keep Ibuki out, that goes the other way too, and tends to lead to her having quite a lot of advantages in specific situations. Neither can really sleep on it and just do whatever they feel like in this matchup. The other tends to have a counter to pretty much anything they could come up with. Even the stuff they're used to being at least somewhat helpful against other players. Other characters especially. I'm surprised that was not a wake-up super. There we go.
Ibuki wins. Round one. Fight.
thing that you do see well represented here is the chance to set up, instead of using any kunai, because it's not really part of the zoning game, at least not on the necessary level. She can get enough space to retain them if she really needs to. Like that. But it is a little bit more work than otherwise might be. You'll notice, for example, that now that the feed trigger is active, Zangief basically can't just jump because this will happen.
Round 2. Fight.
So a perfect example of a match that changes a lot when a meter is available to one side. Making that decision a clearly good one. Let me get you away from me now quickly while you have just given the meter, so that I can do something with that meter if you try to get back in.
Final round. Fight.
The Zangief player, despite what may be visible, given that they're a Zangief and facing a relatively accurate knee, is actually pretty evasive. They know when to stop moving forward, what spaces to jump from, and so on. It's just that at the moment, they don't really have a lot of options other than just walking forward and hoping for the best. Technically, I would probably have chosen in their place, given their style, to use Zangief's other V skill, because it does help against her in a lot of ways.
Ibuki wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
Be on guard. For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you.
Round 1. Fight.
Ibuki's jump options and range attacks are so good that playing Karin can be a downside. It's certainly, in this case, if you must, certainly she could bother to learn the matchup, but there are also times where you simply need to find time to practice the other form of it for when you know that your Karin will work, because of your opponent's style. So, while normally, when facing Ibuki players, Kansuki Dynasty will in fact use Karin anyway, recognizing that, hey, sometimes I actually just need to do this and also practice the Kami side, comes up fairly often. But unfortunately, the Ibukis to use that training on don't, and therefore it's hard to test it. Various changes to Ibuki have made her a more similar character to Cammy and Karine over time, but with different core goals in neutral, let's say. And you can somewhat tell this because of the changes in what Cammy ends up doing in neutral because she's fighting Ibuki. She ends up often being more defensive and not necessarily pressing on Ibuki as much once she has the spacing, since she is often then forced to deal with difficult jumps. She can't afford to just try to rush in either, and she can't necessarily jump herself once Ibuki's V trigger is available. This doesn't necessarily cut down her options too much, because she does have the Axel Spin Knuckle as a relatively good option, and she can just use her forward heavy kick to deal with a lot of things Ibuki wants to do. But both of these things can be defeated, so there's a lot of, I'm going to hit a couple times, and if you block, I'm backing off because I can't really win out after that. This is more useful because if you back off sometimes, your opponent will somewhat expect this, and those times where you want to hit a button, because that's just your standard way of playing, the button is more likely to work. As we always try to tell you, learn to sometimes do something completely separate from your standard, just so that when you slip back into your standard, even not necessarily you were expecting it, but maybe your opponent will definitely have a harder time learning to adapt around you. If you put some effort into doing a different and possibly better thing, but it doesn't always have to be a better thing. It can just be an equal thing that causes them to be more susceptible to the other thing. Of course, interactions that involve things like that, V-trigger cancels, and being ready for specific situations and so on, are much harder to do that with. Since you only generally get one chance per round, and therefore convincing your opponent a certain thing will or will not happen is much harder. But it's still worth your time to not end up in the situations that are just your opponent getting to stress you the entire time. So that went pretty well for a matchup that she does not get to play too much, and probably will need at some point, because at the higher levels, if you're going to at least strain your opponent, you may want to at least start with your secondary. If you are in a tournament situation and you have a secondary that is better in the matchup, whether it is considered to be so by all parties or just by yourself, starting off with that character can help you get something out of it, a slight misleading of your opponent. And since in tournaments, when you lose, you get the option to change character, then you go back to your main if you need to, and play it out. At least by then you've got some information on how your opponent thinks and how they want to approach specific things to tell you outright whether or not switching to your main is a good idea.
Round one. KO. Damn you! Round two.
can't say I'm surprised that they have an Akira available. Whether or not they're picking this because of matchup issues or not is harder to say. Ed isn't necessarily great against most characters by most people's standards, but if you're good enough at spacing, he can be at least even with a lot of the standard type mid-range characters, particularly pressury ones. Often it's just a matter of being a bit more daring, and part of the reason why I believe he's not as popular in top level play is because, yeah, after a while you kinda have to guess. It's similar to how people had a problem with Lara for a while, because yes, you have to guess. You don't have enough surefire tactics to win every match. And yeah, some people feel kinda bad when they lose in that way.
Wins.
But Ed does have enough tools now and enough increased damage that he can sit on a life lead for a while once he manages to get it. His vulnerabilities mostly pop out once the opponent has their V trigger available, especially if it has some form of explosive damage. But we can already see our Ed player is relatively cautious and willing to play clean at the beginning, looking for ways to get themselves to a life lead. This isn't a very obvious thing, unless you've played a lot of Ed or watched a lot of Ed play. But I believe the best thing I could point out is that while he does have options for using simpler tools, those tools offer enough risk for the opponent, for when the opponent decides to just be daring, that it might not result in having a life lead. And then even if he reverses the situation, it may not turn out as well for him. If you think about what Ed's tools are in general, for example, you could try using the V skill to push forward and grab her, but it takes relatively long, and Akira's not usually doing too much in neutral before then, so she's more likely to be ready to jump it. Her jump is also quite good for the purpose. So, we see a lot of footsie style movement instead of trying to land it and pull her close. Generally, because if it fails, it will bring her closer, but you don't necessarily want that. She is quite good at close range, at least Ed's equal, as we've mentioned many times, because this is practically a mirror match in certain ways. And Ed's damage just generally isn't as explosive, unless the situation has really gone in your favor. But that miss is a tiny chance. Honestly though, they're probably just gonna give it up.
Akira wins. Let's do this.
For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you.
Round one.
Well, having a Kami is not terribly surprising either, but I do expect quite a different one than we normally see. Heavier on the movement, and let's call it dodging and retreating. If you're an Ibuki main, your Kami style is often going to involve movement and not necessarily trying to win out in footsies as strongly, which is more or less what we're seeing. Unfortunately for DeWolf, the way to handle this with Necalli... Oh wait, no, he does have the right view. Okay. Catching Kami with Necalli's V skill 1 can be difficult enough that it's probably not worth your time. But putting Necalli Beast in the right place against an evasive person gives you a lot of space you can occupy without having to worry about them taking specific actions. You can't really call it lockdown, because the goal isn't really to prevent Kami from moving at all. It's more so just to prevent her from going a specific place, so that you can occupy that space fearlessly. Necalli doesn't have a lot of very complex approaches physically, so it's kind of necessary to have this.
Round two.
Kami can of course deal with this simply by being more aggressive and somewhat more willing to just throw out attacks, but if those attacks fail, then you're not going to get much out of it. Fortunately, Necalli also doesn't have a lot of really good ways to use meter for big damage here, as she's not going to stand still long enough to get command grab. If you can set up the situation though, simply because the player has not had a reason to fear it before then you might be able to get something good. Still, this character is moving very fast, so you basically end up saving your meter for that moment. With no kill though, it's going to be a little hard to make the call, and light kick.
Necalli wins. Round one. Fight!
This is another one of those matchups where Necalli moving at least a bit is a form of defense, and can therefore... You don't have to play as quietly as one normally does against pressury characters.
Round two. Fight!
Since so much of this is about throwing off Kami's aim and forcing her to need to press buttons in places where Necalli's buttons either win or are more threatening in some way even if blocked. We're seeing a lot of that now. And even that choice of when to use the EX stomp was probably along similar lines. Normally Kami gets to hit one more button in that spacing. I'm not sure if the player chooses not to hit it because it's Necalli, because Necalli does make it a little more difficult to do. Or he just isn't used to the character because Ibuki only hits 2 buttons there. She can't actually hit a third. But the main problem it's causing is, for someone who is used to playing Ibuki, the jump arc is wrong now. They can't push themselves out enough to get the cross up, and therefore it's relatively easy for the wolf to just walk back, or rather forward a step and then throw. This is something you have to learn a lot of for this game. Specific characters, when the cross up will whiff and when you should use that the other way, simply get out of the way and throw them. Usually because the way the game's interactions work, you can't actually do anything about it. You just get thrown, like, almost all of the time.
I'll be on guard.
Nekali.
For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you.
Round 1. Fight.
These two don't actually play on these characters very often, but the wolf is used enough to Hanzo Dynasty's oppressive harem that the oppressive Kami isn't necessarily going to be overwhelming. It is, however, generally fairly effective no matter what you do, since the defensive situation that Nekali is in is pretty constant.
Mission complete.
This is, however, the matchup in which the command grab does help. Just doesn't necessarily always help in the places you'd expect it to. Are we lost? Have we lost connection entirely? There's no way to tell just yet whether or not the stream itself will have to restart. No, it looks like we only lost the wolf for now. Probably will be back. But let's continue with who we got. Although no, there they are.
Let's do this.
I believe I've noted before that against most characters, if you see a 0 LP Sagat, you can't really tell. It takes a while to discern whether or not Sagat, a Sagat player, is trying to learn something or an experienced 0 beast. But this is one matchup where that's not true. Versus Guile and versus Manat, you will almost immediately know how much experience the Sagat player has.
Round 2.
With Manat, it can be ambiguous because it could simply be that they've never fought Manat enough in a matchup. Against Guile, though, you will know, because Sagat has to learn so many little things, but they're so required for the matchup that if you don't know them, yeah, you're just going to get destroyed. I don't necessarily expect that these players know each other in any way, or that the Sagat player is necessarily watching the stream, but for the sake of discussing things as a whole, here is the laundry list of things you need to learn to do on Sagat before fighting Guile is even reasonably possible. The first is learning when to backdash. Normally Sagat gets to stand his ground and just uppercut whoever comes in and so on, but because Guile can throw basically the slowest projectile in the game, and has one of the longest zoning jump attacks in the game, Sagat runs into some problems because of the way in which certain things are extended. After that, you have to learn how to jump over Guile's projectiles from far away, when to actually go for the uppercut, when to go for your sweep, simply because there's nothing else that will work, even though Guile may punish the sweep. And, more or less, the fact that you can't count on Guile players to not do flash kick in neutral against Sagat, simply because while he can definitely get good damage, they get so much more benefit from both the knockdown and the overall situation. If they get into V-Trigger 2 mode, it's even harder. Guile is almost always at a spacing on screen where he's not terribly susceptible to Sagat zoning. He can either throw out his own booms to hit the projectiles, or obviously just block them. The rest of us are usually trying to walk in, and Sagat's wiggling around, not exactly telegraphing when the projectile will be thrown, and sometimes just using those moves for pushback, assuming that we don't jump in time. Guile cares about none of these things, and therefore Sagat needs to be very mobile quite often. That said, they seem to have let that one go. And we are on to Sakura again. Not terribly surprising, but I am surprised about doing this for this matchup. I think Stenmester does occasionally change character after playing like 10 rounds of Guile in our lounges, but warming up, either on Guile or just in general, does tend to be important in some way. This is a character who is what we call a zero beast, or was for a while. I guess they decided to get into at least rounds for some reason. Sakura's main problem in this matchup is that Guile's pressure, as being demonstrated quite well here, is functionally too good for her to deal with on the standard level. He also doesn't put himself in a lot of situations where it's easy to punish for that pressure, even if he overextends it. With many other characters with good strong mid hits, Guile will get into some problem somewhere, but the way that Sakura's heavy kick and heavy punch work, and her general lack of other really good options for the same space, as her medium punch is so short, really Guile gets to do a lot of things and just get away with it, while she's hoping for the crouch medium kick into something as her poke. One good option is to just use your meter and straight uppercut as your punishes. The uppercut will usually reach, and the knockdown is good enough. If you're daring, you can use her back heavy punch instead, but that's again being daring, as you will be punished quite hard if the Guile player actually didn't finish it. Am I gonna finish it? No, unfortunately they dropped it.
Guile wins.
So a somewhat difficult matchup to have to pull yourself through. This gal does have a lot of good counters to Sakura things.
Round 1.
I'm therefore also somewhat surprised at the V-Trigger 2 choice, but it is a way to do the same thing. You just get more free, fast uppercuts to resolve the I can't punish you right now problem. We've discussed on the last stream playing dutifully versus boldly, and this is one of the few matches where I think you can't afford to play dutifully. Obviously, I can't speak for every Guile versus Sakura matchup out there, and I really should probably find some more to study now that I'm thinking about it. But there may simply be a reason why I don't see this matchup much. It might just not be a good idea from the Sakura side most of the time. It's complicated by the difficulty in even getting certain of her combos off because of the spacings they occupy. And of course, can't even save yourself with the cross-up because Flash Kick does not care. Technically, all this turns out being, after a while therefore, is Sakura moving into positions that then force her onto defense. It's really not great. At least with characters like Chun-Li, you have enough range to force Guile to block in mid-range. And then maybe, so that he doesn't have to block, he'll hit a button and you can do something else. But I definitely feel like I would want to study this matchup more, so I'll make a note to actually do that.
It's go time.
Because I don't want to mislead anyone about how realistic it is to try that, but
Let's do
I can't even suggest for Kanzuki Dynasty to test it with Sakura now because I literally can't think of a single thing that makes this work truly other than just uppercutting as a punish. I can see no situation in which her V skill 2 won't just get flash kicked as well, and I can't think of a scenario in which the V trigger 1 will actually result in much other than I can block booms kind of a little bit. Cammy on the other hand has options,
Be on guard.
but they're not necessarily the options you'd expect her to have. She's much closer to the Chun-Li style of play. And this matchup, I've watched at extremely high level, and I know why it works or doesn't work. Mostly, Cammy just needs to hit stand heavy punch in neutral. Getting in or trying to dodge around Guile's stuff is not the goal, because Guile will keep on backing off if you do it. And, if you doubt me, these are the words of Daigo Imahara himself. I have watched the match, I have watched the explanation of why this works. Because you simply can't close that space right there without Guile having an option. But Guile can't hit buttons if you are using your light kick, your heavy punch, and willing to watch his movement after your heavy punch, similar to what I was mentioning with Chun-Li. You can also use your medium kick if you really want to, but it's a little riskier to do. This is compounded by the fact that at a high level in this matchup, Guile basically doesn't get to jump. Unlike many other characters whose anti-airs have at least a chance of like trading with Guile's crazier stuff, Cammy doesn't care. He only gets to jump when you've left him alone long enough. Similarly, therefore, you don't have to do anything. Right here, for example, that spacing created by the heavy punch and the light kick is just one that seems so disadvantageous to Guile that it's not really a concern to you as the camera. The other thing you can do, which tends to be stressful for Guile, but not too stressful. Like, you will still get hurt for doing this. It's a question of how much you'll get hurt. Is when you are in the position in neutral where you're close together and don't think you want to hit buttons to do anything in particular, then you can do the spin knuckle. Most prepared Guile players need to stand to do what they count as their good footsie buttons. And remembering that he must stand to use his good footsie buttons is really important. He does have crouch medium kick, which does help, but you kind of want him to hit that. Because that is the thing that the stand heavy punch beats, or deals with at least. So, once you've gotten into particular positions like this one, yeah, you can just go around him. You can also therefore hit buttons because he's thinking maybe you'll go around me. It is even a defensive tool you can use technically in his pressure strings occasionally. Because of the way that Cammy moves, it tends to cause her to evade the last hit of certain Guile strings. I wouldn't necessarily say you could hit it on wake up, but there are times when I would. You know the type of person I am already. Is this hit? No. So yes, those are the basic things to keep in mind. Now, keeping all of them in mind enough to actually still anti-air on top of all that is a different question, but it's a quick crash course in how you can play this matchup without having to worry too much about the fact that Cammy doesn't have a lot of good tools to get her past Guile's defenses. It is more so that you can put Guile on a defensive without actually getting that close to him, based mostly on the fact that his own good footsie buttons require him to stand up.
Let's do this.
Necalli can do similar things, except that he's in an even better position. What he lacks is the equivalent to the spin knuckle as a tool. But not entirely. He does have some weird options that could get him through that too. Overall, Necalli can do all of this, but he can do it from crouching because his crouch heavy punch pushes Guile out of the range where Guile has good footsie buttons once again. One of the main reasons why this should be considered a main option is it's not that Guile can't hit you. In fact, part of the reason why his sweep is so fast and so good is because he really needs a button to punish people who do the sort of thing I'm talking about. But it's a sweep, so, you know, bad things might happen to you. So Necalli can absolutely hit, in his own case, sweep, because Guile's doesn't punish it terribly well at max range. In fact, I think it doesn't punish it at all. He can hit his stand medium, his crouch medium, and his crouch heavy punch. His stand heavy kick does not get as much traction because Guile usually stands a little closer than that, but if you just want to push him out and see what he does when he comes back in, it's not terrible. I wouldn't necessarily suggest it because most of the time, the only thing you're getting out of this is a Guile that's walking forward, which you could use against him, but it's not really helping a lot. Because it's not as if Guile doesn't have good pressure. You have to understand a lot about this character in order to just, like, press buttons during Guile strings or get out of stuff. So, I wouldn't hit the stand heavy kick here. Similar to why Cammy doesn't really hit the crouch heavy punch as much. You benefit from it in that Guile is away from you, but unless you're really daring about him walking forward, because he does walk quite fast, it's not really going to help you. When you have a Guile player of this strength, therefore, they're just going to walk up to you because they realize, oh, you're trying to keep me out, which means I can just do this, okay. This is compounded by the fact that if he's being really careful about it, you won't actually even land your crouch medium kick most of the time. So, for Nikali, it's similar to Kami. There is a certain set of moves that put Guile in space where he wants to counter, but he must stand up to do it. And because he must stand up, he can't flash kick. Nikali in particular has the benefit of being able to both dive kick and cross up from those positions well enough that unless the Guile player is really focused on it, you can get something. Similarly, opening dagger, his down forward heavy punch may help. But we're already seeing it again. Unfortunately, backdashing doesn't help a lot either. One thing that Nikali does have going for him though, which is not commonly understood, is that you can in fact just do like a command grab when Guile is walking at you. I'm not sure why this works to this day, but it does work. I'm not sure which command grab you actually have to do, because I've only seen it done. Overall though, there is a position that you can get Guile into where you expect him to walk forward, and just because you expect him to walk forward or throw out buttons, you can just command grab. The worst that will happen, usually because he can't necessarily react to the fact that you did it while in that flow, is that he'll hit the same button he was going to hit anyway. And that was probably another drop, I guess. Unfortunate internet stability problems on that side, I think. It looks like it, at least sort of. Arsagat doesn't seem terribly keen on trying that again, but we'll see what happens in a moment. Nope, around they go. Is this player ready? They are.
Let's do this.
At the core of all this, therefore, is the concept that you want, if you're pushing Guile out, you definitely don't want to push him too far most of the time, and if you do, you need to convince him to not walk forward. And usually, your crouch medium kick is not going to cut it. If you have some other move that will prevent him from wanting to walk forward, then you can use that move, and that may give you more chances to use your crouch medium kick, even if it's only in the hope that he'll try to get away or something, and other interactions of that type. If you're playing a character with tons of range, or basically Abigail, then you can do some other stuff when you expect him to do it simply because you can neutral jump, and definitely have some options for good things to happen. Back jump is also, I think Abigail and Seth back jump and get good things out of it. But it looks like we're on to the Cody matchup. Cody is in fortunately a similar position. Can just like hit crouch heavy punch and hope for the best sort of. And the light kick does not hurt either. But if you take nothing else away from this particular sequence, remember that part of it. Guile footsies, full footsies with all of Guile's options, tends to involve some standing up. It's just that the rhythm of it means you can't just, well, go, okay, well, I'm going to hit you with a low now because you're definitely going to stand up. He will do something else to prevent that from being effective. But him standing up, him walking forward are all things you can at least somewhat count on, as he's really not very dangerous if he doesn't. So think about everything you understand about this character, and then look at the sheer amount of time that this player spends actually walking forward simply because it's part of something they have to do. And even if not walking forward, certainly standing up. As I've noted, if you're not familiar, Sinister is actually a very strong player who tends to not rank up for various reasons, so don't let the rank fool you in terms of how precisely or well this Guile is being played as a whole.
Guile wins.
Or come in and try fighting them yourself and see what happens. There's that too. We're always thankful when they join in, because most Guile, once you start to do particularly well against them or beat them, at least the ones who tend to join our lounges other than this player, they either change character or like continually back off or just leave. So it's kind of hard to get practice at doing the correct thing. And while our Guile bots are very good at teaching you to handle the character's moves, Guile players, due to the fact that the character is so relatively simple, have a lot of tricks you have to learn that the bots simply can't simulate. Or rather, a single bot can't simulate. It's part of the reason why we have 2 Guile bots in the first place, and technically should have 3. We do not have a Guile bot based on this player, more or less, because we do occasionally base things partially on players' playstyles that we know. But this willingness to walk forward and specifically hit jab in specific positions, make sure that the standing is ready and so on. This whole bit, this is not the easiest thing to replicate bot side. You can do it, but it might be a little too predictable and not contain the rest of the things that make it scary.
Guile wins.
I've long since learned that part of the reason I can't play this character in this game, or any other Street Fighter game actually, is because he requires that specific skill set. And while you could say that I have it at least on some characters, my mind automatically kicks. So I play Chun-Li instead, where that is the correct thing to do.
Let's do this.
Okay, we are back to Ibuki, and Ibuki tends to have an easier time of this simply because she can fight from longer range, both through the use of Gun and Tenrai, her skill 1, and secondarily, while she doesn't have the best anti-air against Guile, she has 2 good ones which she has to thread the needle to get between. So if your anti-air reactions are well honed, you mostly have to worry about the same thing we've been talking about the whole time. Guile's movement forward and the skills involved with that. Of course, the sweeps you're seeing are not a terrible plan, but Ibuki's damage from the sweep punish, unlike Sakura, is explosive and really effective from nearly any range. She has at least 3 different ways to start the very powerful sweep punish I'm talking about, so landing the sweep this many times is more so a matter of understanding enough psychology to know that it's okay to do it. You'll probably notice it stopping in certain scenarios as well for this reason. What this player probably needs to round out their anti-Guile repertoire is the understanding of when Ibuki is capable of doing a back jump air throw. Right there, where Guile goes for the jump twice, because it's generally a good idea to do that, you can, with most characters, manage the back jump air throw against him because he can't use his jumping heavy kick, and his light kick doesn't generally tend to interact with it in a way that will cause you to die. This is something you can practice on our Guile bot too. And he will usually get himself into the position where he's explicitly trying to cross you up. You can take note of where he manages from and see if you get beaten out while doing it. He should have most of the inputs required to have you see yourself lose out if you were supposed to lose out. But without that, that's going to be kind of difficult, because we see that anti-air works fine. The heavy kick, from when he's far enough away, will usually at least trade, and while that's not necessarily in Ibuki's favor, it's not terrible. You get that jump forward when the 2 of them are in a scramble, so she should usually be able to handle Guile's aerial things. But if he does do that setup and double jump, you're going to need to be able to do that jump air throw most of the time. One of her other main problems is him simply setting up the jump so that she can't do anything else. Since her uppercut is a relatively weaker and difficult to time option relative to his jump and to other things he does with boom setups, you're going to spend a lot of time stressing about his jump ranges and then being thwarted by him just setting up to use the right boom twin so you can't actually deal with them anyway. So learning when to backdash entirely out of it before trying any anti-air can be important. Fortunately, as he's just not a character with too many options to overwhelm you, you will end up working on that anyway. No. Looks like they're still practicing that combo.
Guile win. It's go time.
Okay, it was a bit of a mess, and now we're back to full, and now rotations, and Craig Mack is back, and now this is just going to turn into a lot of things happening all at once. But, back to the Cammy trial again. So, in the end, you're just trying to interpret whatever your character does along, assuming that they actually have to play footsies with Guile at all. If you don't need to play footsies with Guile, you can ignore everything I'm saying because it doesn't apply to you. But if you must do so in order to be functional, especially if your anti-airs are decent but not great, You are looking for the move that will whiff, punish, or otherwise bother Guile if he needs to hit crouch medium kick, which again does not combo into anything and therefore you're fine. This will then help you set up situations where he can't necessarily enter spaces that you don't want him to, and you can use your anti-airs and uppercuts and so on. And understand above all else that you don't want to push him too far out, because then you can't proactively hit a button then. Pushing him too far out and then trying to react to him walking in toward you in time with the right button is too hard. So just don't push him that far and use some other proactive movement to get you around his movement. And that will help. That'll probably be enough. It can't always be enough, obviously, because otherwise Guile would be terrible. But understanding that you've got these options in your plan space, and that you don't take a lot of options while doing a lot of damage while doing it, which is probably the most important part. That situation there you're trying to create is the double hesitation, and Guile often loses in the double hesitation position against other characters of this type. Also a little laggy, but probably wasn't the reason that anti-air was missed. It's getting a little weird.
Final round. Fight.
As you can see, you're usually looking for a move that doesn't have great range, hopefully is a heavy and fast, and therefore you might still get your anti-air off or at least block after swinging it out, resulting in that. Of course, depending on the player, you can put yourself more in the mindset to just always uppercut or not. But the important thing about this is you don't generally have to get yourself to not hit the button. Most of the time you won't die as a result of hitting it. And if your opponent notices that you keep on hitting it, they keep on jumping it, and you have to block, many people will be more incentivized to jump, which is even better for you if your anti-airs are good. Doubly good if your anti-airs lead into pressure, because while Guile can definitely get out of pressure, it kinda helps for him to not have a lot of meter to use on you. Probably a little mashing on both ends. Lag tends to make people that way, but generally, actually, the worse the lag is, the less you can press, even if you're dying as a result of it.
Let's do this. Round one. Cover yourself.
There you see how Nikali gets to make best use of this. Karin's sweep is too slow. Cammy's sweep is too short. Nikali's sweep is just right. And can therefore be used as a straight up footsie tool. You should check for your own character. While obviously it's not normally a great idea to just hit sweep in footsies of all places when your opponent might just block, especially when they're playing a character who's like at least somewhat based on blocking. But if you know that the Gal player is either going to try to hit a button or move forward, and that your character can either low profile or does not tend to extend their hurt box very much when they do their sweep, then yeah, go for it. Characters for whom this definitely does not work are, I believe, Bison. Boxer might work still?
Guile wins.
And Luke, interestingly. Luke's sweep doesn't take him physically down enough to come up with anything there. I haven't checked whether or not Rose works, but I think hers is similar to Karin in that it's somewhat too slow.
Round one. Fight.
Of course, part of the reason I suggest being able to do all of this from down back is that if the Gal player tends to back off or is pushed out in any way, you've been holding down back the whole time. You're probably ready to disguidance, and the more often this happens, the more likely you are to get the disguidance right in time and burst through whatever sonic boom he decides to throw. Even the faster ones, if you were thinking it was going to happen, sure, go for it. Guile's defenses are generally so good that if you've decided, I'm not going to hit things because he may block, you're going to end up having a very rough time, simply because he'll get to hit all those buttons that will continue to lock you down. But there you can see why the stand heavy kick doesn't necessarily work all that well. It's more often than not a hitbox interaction that favors Guile in some way. And neither the trade, nor obviously getting outright beaten by, let's say, Guile going for sweep, does Necalli much good in any of the situations. All it does is create more openings. You would have to be confident that Guile was going to block before the stand heavy kick became a good idea. But here we go, Craig Mack is back. We might actually get to see the Luke versus Guile in action.
Let's do this.
These two characters don't do well from what I've seen when they fight close to each other, but they don't do well when they fight really far from each other either, because it's a stalemate that Guile tends to win most of the time, simply because he has the better jump positioning. But Luke can also jump at Guile, simply because Luke has a better lateral kick, so both these players are quite good. We'll see what turns out. And hopefully I'll pick up something on it. They're not necessarily the type to just straight up stalemate it out, so... or at least I hope they're not. That said, you can only get so far by going that route, and I think, in general, Guile will come out on top simply because, even though they are both able to use their V skill to boost their projectiles, I think Guile ends up winning out over the long run while doing so. Yeah, here's the problem. If they're too close together, they tend to be very susceptible to between each other's moves, with no real benefit to the one that is going to try to do something crazy. So they tend to hover between the two spaces and hope for the best. But as you can see, Guile recovers from booms so fast that it doesn't even matter.
Round 2. Fight.
I think I'm probably going to be quiet now and check all these layers of complexity that I didn't get to see before.
Guile wins. Round 1. Fight. Round 2. Fight. Final round. Fight.
for the 6th anniversary of this game, someone can get Capcom to change it so that their win quotes are visible from further away. Well, unfortunately, while that did confirm my understanding of the matchup, I didn't learn a lot of the nuances of it just yet, so maybe they'll play again.
Let's do this.
No need.
Round one.
Sonic boom. Sonic boom. Sonic boom. Huh. Sonic boom. Sonic boom. Sonic boom. Easy operation.
Round two. Fight.
Sonic boom. Huh. Sonic boom. Huh. Right there. Right here. Got it. Sonic boom. Huh. Sonic boom. Sonic boom. Sonic boom. Weak. What? I'm airtight. Sonic boom.
KO. Guile wins. Round one. Fight. Right there. Weak. Right here. Sonic boom. Right there. Sonic boom.
Well, if nothing else, she does have the benefit of being able to do that. Some characters can in fact jump in ways that cause Flash Kick, Luke's uppercut, and Sagat's uppercut to miss entirely. Staying calm enough to actually get crush counters or at least decent damage afterwards, a little harder. Sometimes you actually can't crush counter, or sometimes you have to use a different crush counter button. But consider learning it, because it's a source of relatively big damage, just not very often. It really is hard to be ready and trust those uppercuts. I'm not even sure that that was one of the places where you could have done it. There is a space that Guile can slip through where I think you can't do anything. But still not sure yet. Because it is one of those things that takes years and years to learn every single nuanced piece of.
Final round. Fight.
This round is doing a really good job of showing off how much difference there is when one has the various anti-jump reactions. Ooh, but I think that was probably a missed input because that was definitely supposed to be anti-Airfuma. Pretty sure it would have worked too, but it's always a little better when you know how it could have gone and what you need to practice, and it wasn't just, I got destroyed and I don't even know what happened.
It's go time. Let's do this.
Come on!
Round one. Fight.
generally, the reason why this is stressful on Karine is because of this. She really can't manage the anti-air game as easily as Cammy can, and often has to treat this more like a fight with Bison and dash or tank hold to prevent Guile from getting into those positions. But she's also much better at staying out of this position where Guile gets to jump in the first place, so it's not as bad. Knowing how to deal with each move that's thrown at you though, especially when you have a character that actually has answers to all of them, but you'd have to react, you probably need to train it purely by sound, and you need Guilebot 1 for that, which we don't really have on any systems at the moment that I'm aware of. And of course she also does lack the I'm going to hit a button now because I think you're going to walk it. One can use her skill 2 to get such things, and it's not terrible in the matchup. And because it is chargeable, Guile can't always mess around with it. But it's also not one of those things that most people can just use off the bat. Because it doesn't really stop Guile from walking forward, it just reduces the damage you can take during those times he chooses not to.
You lose.
His jump positions are also not often ones you can beat with her various jump back options or even jump neutral options.
Round 1.
And you are better off, similar to the Ibuki situation, having a character that can just air throw, because it resolves that jump arc, for example. This one too. And I can say that with confidence because, like, I've seen that jump arc so many times. It's a practice part of Guile play. Meaning to the point where if you were sufficiently used to it, you could just teach yourself to forward dash in that position instead.
Round 2. Fight. Round 2. Fight! Guile wins. Round 1. Fight! Right there! Sonic Boom!
Mr. showing impeccable control of this match.
KO.
And it is in its own way a perfect demonstration of what happens when your opponent just doesn't make any mistakes. If you do nothing daring, you will mostly, depending on the matchup of course, be controlled. If you're controlled, then either your reactions are so fast that you can somehow get out of this, or you think they're that fast and are therefore willing to do something daring enough to do so. That line blurs relatively quickly at higher levels, and I believe a lot of higher level players simply stop thinking about whether or not it matters. Did it matter that I actually saw that and reacted in time? Or was I primed and therefore that's what happened? Or did I just happen to hit the right thing because I really thought it was going to happen and I was right? At the end of the day, as long as there is a probability involved and it isn't just, well, technically this always loses, but your opponent didn't do their part correctly. If that's not the reason, then sometimes you still gotta do it. Much like that, really.
Guile wins.
But we are coming up on what is probably our last on-stream set of the night. If you're interested in any Melty Blood, we did release our robot last night as planned. And this week, we hope to get a CL bot available at some point. However, we do need to do some more experimentation on a different aspect of it, and I wanted to see if I can simplify her some more because she's a little bit difficult to input properly and doesn't work as well if you can't. So I should at least come up with some easier variants to use. Our robot, on the other hand, is already on our website 2-mk.org under melty-bots. And is treated as an easy bot overall, intended to help you learn the shield mechanic if you're not familiar. If you are familiar, you'd probably want to quote-unquote give this one a pass, as he doesn't really teach semi-experienced multiplayers a lot, and isn't really tuned for matchup stuff per se, but he does a lot of good Roa things for the most part, at least the type that you can learn to punish or evade. So just raw practice might not be so bad since we haven't released any other bots to use as a default instead. Unfortunately, he doesn't really work well when switching character. For those who are not familiar, these types of bots let you do that. You can switch character and keep the same inputs in Melty Blood and Under Night. But while it works and is often helpful in Under Night, Melty Blood has a little too many mechanics that have specific spacings and command normals that are a little stronger, a little bit more specific things to them going on. So you might not be able to get as much out of switching it around. We've got a Guile versus Seth to close it out. And it looks like Seth is skill 1. So we can at least see what I believe is considered the basic interaction between the two at the moment. This is usually more so a question of whether or not Seth can anti-air Guile enough. Because while Seth does have good options in the mid-range, those options mostly depend on Guile not choosing to throw a boom for some reason. Since at the ranges that we're talking about, Seth can't necessarily react with that. It's another, I'm doing this because it's daring and I'll manage to get away with it. That said, as just demonstrated, the character is at least relatively immune to Guile's various I'm throwing a boom and then coming to jump at you setup. Because of that. Really helpful. Guile does have a way out of that though, it's just not a very obvious one. He can walk forward, then do the bullet forward while holding a charge, and often barely manage to get the flash kick off.
Final round. Fight.
Huh, that's an alternate form of that I didn't know existed at all. Another good option is that I think Guile High Kick beats some of these things. So mostly it's about spacing yourself correctly and using a different setup after you throw the bomb. Since Seth can't necessarily approach this by standing still and then suddenly using V skill 1 at the quote-unquote right time, or Guile will jump. It's a very tight spacing, but similar to how Akuma deals with Seth, it's not a spacing that is terribly dangerous to you if you get it a little wrong. Is that over already? Well, either way, I guess that does bring us to the end of the stream for the night. Matches will probably continue for a while. You can probably look for Rune Siren. You can find our information on streaming at 2_MK_FGC and as mentioned, bots at 2-mk.org. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.